Thank you. In January this year, Google announced that every single minute, 60 hours of video was being uploaded to YouTube. Now that's amazing. It's a phenomenal figure. Every second, another hour of video ends up on YouTube. I'm going to be talking to you for about 10 minutes, hopefully, and in that time, if you wanted to catch up with everything that you'd missed on YouTube, it would take you 25 days watching 24 hours a day. So I've set myself the task of making the next 10 minutes more interesting than those 600 hours of content. I'll see how I get on. In that same minute, 140,000 photos are uploaded to Facebook. That's about 200 million every single day. And couple with that with the fact that 2.5 billion camera phones are now in use around the world, and you get a sense that the human race has got the ability now to create visually rich content on a scale that it never has before, and that scale is only widening. But I think most of this content finds its way onto the internet to be shared in the present moment. We don't expect it to be stored. So almost inadvertently, we're creating one of the biggest visual archives that humankind's ever known. In fact, the biggest visual archive that humankind's ever known. Facebook currently holds about 140 billion of our photos, and that number's rising. That's one of these kind of crazy numbers that's almost impossible to get your head around. So here's a little bit of context for that. Getty Images, which is probably the world's biggest commercial photo library that holds everything from editorial stuff to archival stuff to commercial stuff, has about 80 million images, and that gives you some sense of the scale between those two. The US Library of Congress, which has 15 million images, and the BBC Photo Archive about 10 million. So Facebook's only been around in a form that we could all use for about 6 years, and in that short period, it's completely dwarfed these other places, these traditional repositories of our images. And while it's by far the biggest place on the web, it's by no means the only one. There are many, many other places where we upload and store our pictures. So for the first time in history, ordinary people are recording the world around them on a massive scale. It's been probably about 100 years since photography became accessible to ordinary people, but until very recently, the costs were so prohibitive that most of us only recorded the big events in life. Now we're recording the big events like never before, small events and the apparently mundane. And I think the historical value of that stuff's quite obvious, but we're in danger of messing up this opportunity, and here's why. Here's a typical photograph from the US Library of Congress. Now, Every image in the US Library of Congress archive is supported by a whole bunch of extra information or metadata. So things like where the photograph was taken, who the subject is, who the photographer was, the format, and cross-references to other bits of content. Now, that means the whole archive is curated and it's annotated, and that's really what gives it historical value. So if we compare that to a typical picture from Facebook, now, these are two of my closest friends. They're going to kill me when they see this. So I read a study recently that said that about 77% of the photos uploaded to Facebook from the UK, alcohol was a factor. Now, I can believe that, but I don't think that means we're a nation of drunkards. I think what that actually means is that what I was saying before, we're uploading this content because we want to share it now. We don't actually expect it to last. We expect it to be forgotten quite quickly, but of course it's not. All this stuff is being recorded, and I imagine most of the stuff on Facebook will probably outlive everybody in this room by quite a long stretch, unlike the shoebox of prints in our attic, which will get forgotten. So although we're creating content on a scale that's unprecedented, the value of that content from a historical point of view is completely out of balance with its volume. And this is for three reasons. It's because it's not open, it's badly indexed, and there's just too much of it. I think that our children's children are going to curse us because for the first time in history we had the opportunity to create this real genuine legacy of the things that were important to us, but we didn't. We messed it up because we were so concerned about sharing things in the present day that we actually ended up leaving them less valuable content than our grandparents and their box brownies did. So excuse me. In the same way that new motorways fill with roads and our waistlines expand as high-calorie food becomes cheap, we have this kind of incessant need to use technology to its max as soon as it becomes available. And I think we need to find ways to constrain ourselves. If we don't find those ways to constrain ourselves, then we're going to be leaving it up to the cultural elite again to decide which of this generation's stories form part of our future history, and that would be a real shame. So 7 years ago, I started taking a photograph every single day. and writing a little piece about something that happened to me, an experience or a thought that I'd had. And it was a project I fully expected to get bored of after about 2 weeks, but strangely I found it to be one of the most compelling things I've ever done, and other people thought that too. So I'm now 7.5 years into that, and what I'm able to do is to look back on any day over those 7.5 years and pinpoint exactly what I was doing on any given day. I still take about 10,000 photographs every year, but my daily photojournal forces me to think about just 365 that I want to share with the world in a given year, each one representing one day of my life. Now that's only part of the story, because in those 7 years, Blipfoto has blossomed into this worldwide community, tens of thousands strong, of people who do exactly that. They take and share just one photograph a day. And I think although we grow every month and on an individual level we get a huge buzz out of this, I've realized that we're doing something quite profound. Together we're creating history. We're still growing and we're still very much in our infancy, but we're already getting a real sense of the value and power of that. So when big events happen, like the earthquake in Christchurch a year ago, we're flooded with very, very rich photographic content. Now, that manifests itself in many ways, but here's a great example. And because the stories that accompany these things give some sense or story behind the picture, it's got much, much more value. So here's one of what apparently looks like a collapsed building, but that blue shape in the foreground is actually a dead body that somebody's covered and it's not yet been removed. Or this picture of a man who's peeling an apple for his wife, who's the photographer, and she tells us that he's kept this lamp for years and years, expecting this eventuality and a bottle of kerosene to fuel it. And she also talks about her feelings, that how glad she is that everyone that she knows and all her friends and family are safe and well, and they've got somewhere safe to sleep, and that's all that seems to matter at the moment. Or the teams of people who tirelessly work in their neighbours' back gardens, cleaning up the silt which has popped up through the ground, even though many of these houses have been condemned and they're probably going to be demolished. Or the guys who go and help people clear the possessions out of their houses before the roofs come tumbling in. And this story I particularly like. This person came back to their house and found the walls still standing, the roof still up, but everything they owned covered in their homemade plum sauce. And they talk about how they couldn't imagine ever wanting to taste that sauce ever again, even though it was one of their most favourite things. So I think all these stories combine to give a much greater sense of an event like this, and perhaps more importantly, give ordinary people's reaction to that event. And of course, because all this stuff is supported by extra information and the camera's metadata, things like date, time, and location, it gives us a much, much bigger sense of what's going on. Now I'd like you to meet Ron. Ron is a senior manager at a group of brick factories in the West Midlands, and he's about 5 years into his Blipfoto journal. Now, just like everybody else, Ron records his day-to-day life. So a lot of that's about family stuff, but because he works in this industry, he's naturally recording what he does for his work. He takes pictures at work, he takes pictures at home. And he shares all sorts of geeky stuff about this industry that probably most of us thought didn't even exist anymore. Things like, here's a kiln which is being fired up to thousands of degrees centigrade to cure all these bricks. And here's the specials man whose job it is to make the special order bricks, in this case one that Ron's ordered for one of his fellow Blipfoto contributors. But a kind of sad story started emerging from Ron's journal quite quickly, because he'd been tasked with closing down 1, then 2, then 3 of his brick factories, and then all of them, and putting himself and all of his colleagues out of work. Now, Ron talks quite openly about that process, which is fascinating, and he talks openly about his feelings about the demise of the British brickmaking industry. But I think what's quite unique about this, or interesting about this, is that Ron is probably the person best placed in the whole of the UK to record what's happening here. And he's creating this historical archive of immense value, but that's not why he does it. He does it because he just simply likes taking photographs, and like everyone else, he likes sharing bits of his life with other people. So just like the people who upload stuff to Facebook, almost inadvertently, he's creating this massive and really valuable archive of content. But because he's disciplining himself to taking just one photograph a day, and he's supporting it with extra information, it has an immense amount of value that it wouldn't have otherwise. And events don't have to be big, and they don't have to be unique either. So take something which all of us experience every day, like a child starting the first day at school. When we see all these things together, it gives us a real sense of the value of things across time and space. So what's the differences between these kids? What are their parents saying? How do they feel about starting a new school? How do these things compare to each other? If we can create a snapshot of something as simple as the first day at school, it gives us a real sense, I think, of how people feel. So what I've learned through the Blipfoto experience is that a few very, very simple constraints can have a huge impact on the way that people behave. We can be encouraged to, or actually forced to, self-curate. We can be encouraged to throw away all the bits, but the most pertinent, those 365 pictures and stories every year, which mean most to us. We can be encouraged to share things openly, and we can make annotating and indexing that content part of the fun. So I think there's these three things which combine to give the throwaway moments of today much more significance in the future, and we should be building more tools which have these principles at their core. I think if we can build these tools, then we're going to, for the first time in history, be able to create a truly collective human history. And I think that's something worth reaching for, something which is open, something which is insightful and accurate, and it's something which is open to all. So that's my idea worth sharing. Thank you very much.